Hey yo, what's good? It's your boy Mixtape Moth, and today I'm gonna revisit Mobb Deep's Infamy. Let's get to it. Alright, so this 2001 release was the fifth studio album from the legendary Queens, New York rap duo Mobb Deep. I'm pretty sure that most Mobb Deep fans are in agreement that the first three Mobb Deep albums are classics. Now, I'm not including 1993's Juvenile Hell, although that is technically considered their debut. I'm talking about their first three album run from the infamous Hell on Earth to Murder Music. Now, not everyone is going to have Murder Music as a 5 mic album, but I know for certain that it is nothing less than a 4.5. But getting right into the infamy, it was met with lukewarm reception from critics and some Mobb Deep fans. This project was released right after Prodigy's well-received solo album HNIC and during the midst of their beef with Jay-Z. The unfortunate reality is that Prodigy's lyrical performance seemed to take a nosedive on this album when you compare it to his writing on HNIC or any of the preceding Mobb Deep albums. And that was an issue for some folks. It's kind of the elephant in the room. It was something extremely difficult for fans to admit since Prodigy was such a great MC. Also, the sound of hip hop had changed since their fourth album, Murder Music, and this project showed Havoc trying to adapt to the times, which favored a bouncier, more polished, and slight club-like sound. And that transition didn't go over extremely well with traditionalists, even though the majority of these beats still had dark and grimy undertones. Havoc manned most of the boards, but he did bring in more outside producers this time around, like The Alchemist, Scott Storch, and Easy LP. The guests included Lil Mo, the infamous Mob 112, Big Noid, Vita, Littles, and Ron Isley. It contains 17 tracks and lasted approximately an hour and 7 minutes. But with that being said, let me go ahead and just hit y'all with this track by track breakdown. The opening track, Pray For Me, set things off on a dark and dreary note. The Havoc instrumental was both haunting and somber, which was consistent with their formula. They had brought in Lil Mo, who was popping at the time, but the good news was that she was able to adapt to their dark aesthetic really well and managed to pull off a really dope chorus. I feel this was a smart use of a commercial feature because it didn't sacrifice the Mob's traditional sound in the process, and I always viewed this song as a worthy follow-up to the Streets Raised Me from Murder Music. Track 2, Getaway, was produced by Easy LP, and it had one of the more memorable beats on the album. The sample was captivating and hypnotic, and I loved how Mobb Deep worked the lyrics of the sample into their own verses. A couple lines from Havoc that always stood out to me were, snitches calling 1-800 Crime Stoppers when they see me, they like, because they want that $1,000, and not only that, police will die to catch a fucking collar. Right after, we got Bounce, which had a beat that accurately matched the title. It was upbeat and bouncy with a slight West Coast edge to it. Havoc's verse was solid, and the hook was catchy enough, but to be honest, I didn't really care for Prodigy's sluggish delivery here. While I could appreciate Havoc's experimentation with a bouncier sound, I don't have this as one of my favorites. I guess it's listenable though. Whereas track 4, Clap, had an infectious and head-nodding beat from Hav. All in all, it was a banger from a production standpoint. The hook was pretty decent as well, and I always thought that Havoc carried this track as he has some cool lines like, some dudes need the Henny to endure the drama. All I need is information on your crib and armor. Prodigy's verse wasn't bad, despite some lazy lines like, fuck that, fuck y'all, fuck all this shit. Y'all better protect that boy. I murdered that kid. Yeah, sure, it was gangsta and to the point, but just overly simplified from his past work. Now, track 5, Kill That Dude, always felt like a down-tempo version of the previous song. I did like the heavy keyboard presence to the beat. It was skeletal and bare bones, but still eerie like we would expect from Mobb Deep. While I dug this instrumental, I always thought the hook was pretty average. In spite of that, Havoc did have a standout verse. He dropped some streetwise gems like, guess you don't know a dude till you catch a case with him. It ain't all gravy just because you make cake with him. Prodigy, on the other hand, issued a series of death threats to snitches, but done in a more rudimentary way. Yeah, for some reason I always had a hard time finding replay value with this one. Track 6, My Gat Spittin', was a raw and gutter posse track with the infamous Mobb. Initially, I wasn't blown away by this instrumental, but it did grow on me over time, and I always viewed this as a grimy QBC record, something for the trenches and project benches. Right after was the track Handcuffs, which was the first obvious skip from the album, no doubt about it. It saw Havoc experimenting with a double time flow, which actually wasn't all that bad. Production wise, this had an early 80s electronic feel with hi-hats and synths. I actually dug the beat and Havoc's flow, but the concept of the song was awfully cringy. The hook was even worse. I got them keys to those handcuffs. While I could appreciate the experimentation, I feel this one definitely missed the mark. What followed was their smash crossover hit, Hey Love, which featured 112. This was a song that many hardcore Mobb Deep fans struggled to process and accept. Some despised it because it represented such a drastic departure from their core sound. While at the time, I didn't love to see the casuals flock to this song as much as they did, but it really wasn't a bad commercial song at all. It was just something extremely different from Mobb Deep. In the comment section, let me know, did y'all rock with this song when it first dropped? Were you on the fence about it, or did you despise it? I know personally I was on the fence about it. It was only till after the fact that I realized it was okay to listen to. Now, the following, The Learning, Burn, was their first single, which also received a lot of radio play. This had a neck-snapping and infectious loop from Hav that was modern for the time, but still murderous and authentically Mobb Deep. They had brought Vita on board, and she managed to kill the hook, in my opinion, but the MVP of the song would have to be Big Noyd. I just dug his energy and cadence on this track. He rapped, "But wait, you don't think I live a pop life now? Cause hey, you could get popped right now. Me don't play. I keep a gun around my way. Cause I'm a fucking drama king like my guy K Slade." Overall, this was a certified anthem and one of the songs that I feel would definitely make most Mobb Deep fans' playlists. The subsequent track, Live Foul, had a Scott Storch instrumental that sounded like a fake Dr. Dre beat. Now, in fairness, the production really wasn't bad at all. It just sounded like it was meant for an Aftermath artist rather than Mobb Deep. I don't know, maybe I'm being too picky here, but the similarities to Dre's production always bugged me. Next was Hurt Dudes. Here we got a crunchy beat from Hav, which always felt like a slowed down variation of Burn for some reason. Prodigy set it off with "I'll noose y'all and push y'all off the edge. I'm like Ray Benzino, cause how a hangman." So for some context, Ray Benzino was looked at in a better light back then, but nowadays, not many would want to make that comparison. Havoc ended up being the MVP of the song. As a whole, I like this record as it had that get hype but still gutter appeal. The following, Get At Me, produced by The Alchemist, was a real highlight. This was when The Alchemist was starting to come into his own as a producer and really make a name for himself. He provided Hav and P with a cinematic, suspenseful, spy movie type of instrumental. There were also audio clips from The King of New York in the background, which made things all the more cinematic and epic. Havoc said, "Do my dirt quicker from my early days swifter. With the gat, I'm like Basquiat painting that picture." While Prodigy came through with more of his tactical raps that we loved from his past work. Yeah, this was easily one of the best songs on the project. Then there was I Won't Fall, produced by Scott Storch, who provided the Mobb with a dark keyboard and synth beat. It was polished, but still gritty enough to complement their aesthetic. This one had a decent bridge and hook, as well as solid verses from the two, so I really had no complaints with this. Immediately after was Crawlin'. This had a fantastic beat from Havoc that was haunting and minimalist. It sounded like it was made for dingy project hallways and pissy staircases. You know, that shit that you just play at nighttime. The minimalist production here was actually ahead of its time. Like, I could hear this beat being used on a Griselda or Rock Marshy project and people would lose their minds. On this one, Prodigy wasted no opportunity to diss Jay-Z. He said, "I set it off on your bitch ass, don't forget, and your retaliation was weak. Baby pictures." But his best was probably 88. Is you crazy? That's when I was fucking Sophie and you was pumping for poison. Yeah, all in all, this was another favorite from the album. Afterwards was another gem, Nothing Like Home, which featured Littles, Havoc sampled from the Lenny Williams classic "Cause I Love You." Now, this beat could have easily been produced by The Alchemist, and I wouldn't have known the difference, honestly, if it wasn't for the production credits. I feel Prodigy had one of his better verses on the album. His lyricism was a little more descriptive here. "I wake up every day to cathedral ceilings, jump out my bed, wall-to-wall marbles and pillars." Whereas Havoc provided some very sobering words about his not so sobering past. He stated, "My brother passed away 24/7. I was bent, drunk on my pain. I was my own worst enemy going against the grain." The second to last track was "There I Go Again" featuring Ron Isley. Here we get some somber, atmospheric, but crisp funk production from Scott Storch. And this was a track that didn't take off as much as I had expected given the Ron Isley feature. Havoc spoke on the pressures to not get pulled back into the street life. It was a pretty thoughtful street record all in all, but for some reason I always pictured UGK sounding great over this particular style of production. I feel that would have been a really dope collaboration at the time. Then the album concluded with the bonus song "So Long." It was a commemorative record where Hav and P honored their comrades who were locked up behind the walls. This had a melancholy and reflective sample loop that I feel matched the mournful vibe of the record. Havoc talked poignantly about his own brother's incarceration and even blaming himself for having not intervened more. Altogether, it was a solid and mature way for them to close out the album. Overall, I give this project a rating of a strong 3.5 mics. It had some high highs, no question, but it was a noticeable regression from their previous effort, Murder Music. I could understand some fans giving this album 4 mics, but for me, it's probably just a strong 3.5. Despite some strong moments, it just failed to meet or exceed most fans' expectations. I could totally understand some fans loving this album for nostalgic reasons, or perhaps this served as their introduction to Mobb Deep as a group, which I could definitely respect, but the general consensus from everyone at that time was that this album was a letdown, so we can't really do any revisionist history on this project. From a lyrical perspective, Havoc really shined and out-rapped Prodigy on a lot of songs, and this is meant as no disrespect for the late great Prodigy, but for some reason he seemed less enthused here. His bars weren't as detailed or as riveting. At times, it sounded like he freestyled his way through it. This didn't sound like the same guy who gave us 5 mic verses on Apostles Warning, I Shot Ya remix, The War's On, or really any track from the infamous Hell on Earth or even Murder Music. That being said, this didn't in any way take away from Prodigy's legacy, as he was one of the all-time greats. I just want to make that perfectly clear. Still, despite the missteps, there are a handful of really great tracks on this album that I'm sure most Mobb Deep fans embraced and loved. My favorite tracks include Pray For Me, Getaway, Clap, The Learning, Burn, Get At Me, Crawling, Nothing Like Home, and So Long. Let me know what you thought about this album in the comment section below. It's your boy Mixtape Moth. I'm signing out, but be sure to hit that like button and please subscribe. As always, it's peace and blessings. Mobb Deep Infamy 1.